Good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome from the Academy of Healthcare Sciences webinar. My name is Stephen O'Connor. I'm going to chair the meeting, and we've got two great speakers who are going to address sustainability and the circular economy in the National Health Service. We'll have questions and answers at the end of both of the presentations. If you have questions, please could you put them in the chat with your name and surname so that William can open up your video and audio to answer your question personally. So the first speaker today is Alexandra Hammond. She holds a master's degree in environmental policy from Edinburgh University. She graduated with honours from Boston College in the USA. Holds a fellowship with the Energy Managers Association and has previously led the award-winning sustainability programme at Guy's and St Thomas's NHS Foundation Trust. Alexandra is currently the Associate Director, Net Zero and Sustainable Procurement at NHS England, where she leads the team responsible for delivering a net zero carbon footprint plus for the NHS. She was recognised in 2024 as being the 5th most influential female in procurement by Procurement magazine. Alexandra, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Wonderful to be here with everyone today, and great to have this chance to talk to so many new people. I was looking at the chat as people were joining, and lots of unfamiliar names, which is, I think, wonderful for me to reach a new audience with some of the work that we're doing across the NHS on sustainability in the supply chain. Some familiar names too, which is great. So some friends hopefully will be cheering me on in the background. I'll just spend a few minutes with you guys today talking a bit about some of our work and setting the context. I'm really looking forward to the Q&A at the end as well. I hope this is quite interactive. I really welcome your thoughts, your questions, etc., because that's much more interesting than just listening to me talk at you forever. So I will crack on. So Alexandra Hammond, that's my name. I work for NHS England, and I lead on sustainable supply chain. So a little bit about sustainable supply chain and how it works. So you are scientists and understand, I think, the connections and the importance of addressing climate change and health. I don't want to hit you over the head with what is climate change, certainly, but we do know absolutely that nature and climate impact people's health both positively and negatively. We are also very aware that healthcare is delivered in unequal ways across our society, and a lot of that is to do with the natural world, to do with pollution and other factors. And it's a really, really critical thing to make sure that we have equal access to our critical healthcare services. And a really important part of that is making sure that we keep people well in their daily lives. And a big part of that is clean air, clean water, access to green space, access to healthy, fresh food, etc. So all of these things have a really, really clear connection to our core purpose in the NHS, which is making sure that we keep our society well. We also have a huge impact, you know, in our work across health. We are centered around the value that healthcare should do no harm. But actually, we know that the impact of what we buy, how we operate, the products that we use, etc., despite the fact that they do, of course, support our populations to stay well and our healthcare services, they have a huge impact on the environment and also on people. And I think when we talk about this, you know, it's hard to sort of visualize it, but we know that healthcare is responsible for about 5% of UK carbon emissions, and actually globally as well. And you know, that's the same as the impact of a country the size of Denmark. You know, we are not messing around here when we talk about the huge impact that the NHS in England has, let alone the healthcare worldwide. I'm really pleased to be able to show you this this chart on the screen, and I hope you can read the words there. I apologize if they're too small, but I will put a link to the wider report that this sits in into the chat when I'm finished. But essentially, this is a very newly published 5-year update on the NHS total carbon footprint. It was published about 2 weeks ago, and what it shows is a much better, more granular view of where our carbon emissions sit across the healthcare in England. But really, I think what it also shows from a supply chain point of view, which is the part that I lead on, that you know, our piece of the pie previously was about 66% of the total carbon emissions of the NHS sat in supply chain, and it's moved up to 71%. That's partly because the NHS has been reducing its direct emissions, which is brilliant. It's also partly because we have better data, but it's also just proportion. You know, the supply chain is a huge enabler of our decarbonization journey. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about how we're addressing that in my team. So we have sort of 3 core guiding principles that we look to. So we have our net zero agenda, which of course is the sort of center of the conversation today, but it is absolutely linked in and critically embedded with delivering social value. So looking at how we can impact our communities and improve the conditions for people living and working in the UK. Through social value, and then also critically modern slavery. We know we have evidence of there being modern slavery in healthcare supply chains, and we are very aware this is something that needs to be addressed better than we are doing it. It needs to continually be a priority for healthcare. And so my team's also been working with Department of Health and Social Care on laying new regulations for due diligence in the supply chain on modern slavery. That's something that will be debated in Parliament later this autumn, and then we anticipate coming into law next year. So I won't major on that today, but it's another really critical part of a sustainable supply chain. It's not just about net zero. So how do we do this? I guess one thing I will say is when I joined, it's a bit of a sort of my personal story a tiny bit, but when I joined this organization, NHS England, back in 2021, the net zero report had just been published. So the NHS was the first health system to commit to becoming a net zero health system, which is brilliant. Our commitments are 2040 for the emissions that we control directly, and then 2045 for the emissions that we influence, like the supply chain. And there was a statement in that document, and it said that before the end of the decade, the NHS will no longer work with suppliers who are not aligned to or more ambitious than our net zero agenda and ambition. And my first task was to sort of put together, how do we do that? What does that look like? How do we measure that? What does decarbonizing our supply chain actually look like? So with a lot of banging of heads together and late nights and quite a few stressful early mornings, et cetera, we were able to publish the net zero supplier roadmap for the NHS. And that's this here. So what this is it was approved by our board back in 2021. It sits now within statutory guidance alongside the Health and Care Act. So this is something we are obligated to achieve and follow through with. And essentially, it sets a number of timed milestones, so timed requirements that our suppliers and our colleagues across NHS Procurement need to work with to make sure that we get our supply chain started on this journey. Really importantly, it's not about being perfect. It's not about our supply chain having excellent data on day one that they can really rely on, so we can compare suppliers and blacklist suppliers that aren't sustainable enough. It's really starting off from a perspective of we know that climate change has a huge impact on health. We know that our supply chain is our biggest area of impact. And we want to support our supply chain in that journey to becoming more sustainable. And that is so we did a number of things around this. So one was we made sure that social value was in every single procurement that we did, and we did that very early on. And we also looked at carbon reduction plans. So, just making sure that suppliers had a clear net zero ambition with they'd done their basic baselining and had some projects and ambitions for what they were going to do to reduce that over time. We have 2 upcoming milestones, which I'll touch on a little bit in later on around asking for more emissions. So in 2027, we anticipate asking for our suppliers' supply chain emissions, which is, of course, we know that our big impacts are in supply chain. The same is true of our suppliers. So just asking for their direct emissions really doesn't get us very far. So we need to kind of increase that ambition. And then also some interesting work around product level requirements. So how we're going to ask our supply chain to help us understand what the impact of the products we are buying looks like. And I think really importantly as well, we've been really trying to encourage innovation and looking at new ways of delivering healthcare. And I'm really excited to hear what Hammad has to say later after me about some of the work that he's been doing with drone technology to make sure that that's something that is really built into the way we're doing things. For those of us in healthcare, you will know all about this. Probably done blue in the face around the 10-year health plan for England, which was published this summer. But I think really importantly, it stated very clearly in that plan that the NHS and healthcare across the UK will prioritize our commitments to that were set out in the Delivering a Net Zero NHS report, including our 2040 target for our emissions we directly control and 2045 for those emissions that we influence. So it restates that commitment very clearly in the 10-year plan, which has given us a really clear trajectory for the future to continue on with what we're doing. Other things that we are aware of and that are impacting our forward view and looking at where are part of our kind of ecosystem of progress. So the Life Sciences Sector Plan was also published later in the summer, and that talks a lot about net zero, and that's really that we're working really in partnership with the Office for Life Sciences on how we can make sure that we deliver that really well with industry, but also make sure that we stick very closely to our net zero goals. And other key priorities. So we've got the UK government missions there. We've got the Design for Life roadmap, which is something that the Department of Health and Social Care is working on, particularly around medtech. But it's really about encouraging a circular economy around medtech. And this is something my team is really involved with. And just absolutely passionate about getting right, because actually that's a really important enabler of how we can become a more sustainable health service. Core 20+5, I won't go into a great deal of detail into that right now, but essentially for those that are aware of what it is, it's around identifying the key healthcare priorities for an area, for a population, and understanding how to work with the most vulnerable in that population to help them to get equal access to health services. So it's really about reducing healthcare inequalities, and that's a really critical part of the way that we are working on social value in procurements and informing the questions we ask and how we work with our suppliers. On that, I'm really pleased to say that this summer, big publication summer it was, we were able to launch our NHS Social Value Playbook. Now, if you haven't seen this already, I would really encourage you to go and have a look. It's on the website. It's nice and accessible. It's clear, and it's really practical. It's really about helping anyone who touches on buying. So not just procurement teams, not just suppliers, but people who are buying products, who need things for their, to deliver the services that they're delivering in the NHS or healthcare more generally. And understanding kind of how they can move from social value feeling like quite a conceptual thing that feels quite distant potentially from the service to really understanding how buying something for example buying a new digital service. You can really address carbon emissions by making sure that the data centers are powered by renewable energy, that kind of thing. So looking at how we can sort of make sure that when we're making buying decisions, that we're looking at the longer term impacts of those buying decisions. So the Social Value Playbook is a brilliant piece of work produced by my team. If I don't say so myself, I will not take credit for it. My wonderful colleague Rebecca and Kelly and others have been really instrumental in getting that published. And I think just really importantly, we don't just publish these things, we do a huge amount of engagement around them. So we've had since it was published in July, we've held drop-in sessions, we've held supplier sessions, we've held our Sustainable Procurement Forum, which is a quarterly event. And we've been talking about this, trying to bring it to life, give people the support that they need to do social value really well in procurements. I will go on to the next slide. So what I did want to mention as well is I talked about product carbon information. And this has been something that in the roadmap has maybe been a little bit confusing for people, understanding kind of what exactly we're going to be asking for. I mean, anyone who's working in the NHS who looks around their workspace knows we buy a lot of products, right? Are we going to ask for the product life cycle analysis of every single product that we buy? I mean, wouldn't that be nice to have if we could rely on it, et cetera? But the practicalities are such that actually that's not really the right thing to be doing right now. What we really need to understand is where our products, where we have the most impact and where we can potentially have deliver the most change with action across our product portfolio. So the team is just, as part of that report that was published a couple of weeks ago with the new pie chart, we've been talking about how we can prioritize the products that we look at. So we're looking at our 3 biggest priorities within the pie chart, our biggest impact. So pharmaceuticals, medical technology, and digital. And when I say digital, I don't just mean hardware. I think one of the things that is, those of us that are we're learning very rapidly as a population the impact of things like AI on the environment. Not just from energy use to power AI and data centers, but also on water for cooling. But with challenge comes opportunity. Those data centers create a huge amount of waste heat. We have a lot of heat requirements across the NHS, but more widely across our communities, et cetera. And there's ways of connecting those things up. There's ways of recycling water. So it's about being a little bit more clever about these things and looking at where there's opportunities and how we can enable those by asking really good questions of our supply chain. So there's a real sort of renewed focus that we've been working on with our supply chain on those 3 key areas of what we buy. I will just go to the next slide. So I wanted to just touch on kind of how we communicate with our suppliers and what we do to sort of, the NHS has, well, nobody can say exactly how many because it's not that simple, but we have about 80,000 suppliers. And we spend about £65 billion a year. And so, I remember when I first joined this role, I thought like, oh, I'll do some supplier engagement and kind of go to my, and you sort of think, oh my God, where do I even start? How do we even begin to communicate effectively with that broader range of suppliers? And that's just our tier 1 suppliers, right? That's just the people we have contracts with. Then we have people down the supply chain tiers from there. And it became a very, very complex web of stakeholders very, very quickly. What we realized is that we needed a language with which to speak to our supply chain about sustainability. There were a lot of different tools out there and various kind of different asks of suppliers. So one trust might ask for their suppliers to fill in online questionnaire. Another trust might ask that same supplier to fill in their online questionnaire, and it became quite a kind of muddled conversation, and we weren't necessarily asking the right questions. And I think we put our heads together and came up with the idea of a single source of information, a single source of truth for our suppliers. And it's the Evergreen Sustainable Supplier Assessment. This is something that has been developed by my team. So we didn't use a third-party consultancy. We didn't pay them to put this together to create it. It's built into our e-procurement system that's used across the NHS. So when somebody's buying something, they can see what the supplier has put in and about what they're doing. When a supplier puts their information in, they get a level. And there's the levels 1, 2, 3, or 4. You have to achieve level 1, so you can be not awarded a level. That's still okay. We're still on this sort of introductory path with our supply chain, but it's going to start to become more important to achieve levels on Evergreen for parts of our supply chain. And so essentially, level 1 is essentially our 2023-24 requirement in the roadmap. It links very closely to the roadmap. So it's do you have a carbon reduction plan? Is it publicly available? Has your board or your company directors approved it, et cetera? And then it gets increasingly more difficult. Levels 3 and 4 are much more difficult. They require third-party verification of their emissions, much more proactive action on modern slavery, et cetera. But we do have a lot of suppliers achieving levels 3 and 4. Really, I think one of the things that I think we made the mistake of, and I think it's fair to say, because I think it's really important to be honest about going through a journey like this and learning rather than just sort of thinking you've got it right the whole way through. We have so many leading suppliers in our supply chain who are doing brilliant things that we can learn a lot from. They're going farther and faster than the NHS is. And I think we really want to recognize that. As much as we want to bring up the sort of the baseline of our whole supply chain, we also really want to leverage the intelligence and sometimes the resources. Sometimes these are big suppliers, but often they're small suppliers. Often they're small, nimble suppliers that can think about, hey, you know what, we can make this change. We can do it next week. We don't need to go through all these, approvals and corporate office things. We can just make changes happen really quickly. So I think it's really that Evergreen's given us a really important language to be able to speak to our supply chain in a consistent way. Something we're really proud of. Just to sort of wrap up, I think we've done a lot over the last 5 years, and before that too. The NHS has a long history of sustainability. The Sustainable Development Unit was created back in 2008. I joined Guy's and St Thomas's back in 2009, so I was really involved in that. But it was very much a kind of, we need to do this. It's really important here that information gathering. But I think what we've been able to do with Greener NHS since 2020 is really put some structure and requirements around this that give it real sort of teeth and heft with not only our supply chain, but also with colleagues across the NHS, giving you guys those work in the NHS permission to really lead on this and care about it and be involved. So I'm really proud of what we've been able to do across over the last 15, 20 years. But I also acknowledge there's just still so much more. So that just can't be done by small teams in the national office. It's just, we can do our bit, but it's really about creating a critical mass around this. And I'm so excited about the ways that we can be clever about what we do, lean on innovation, really celebrate it, and as the 10-year health plan sets out, transform the way we deliver to be a much more efficient and patient-centered health system. So thank you so much. I just wanted to give one small little plug. I don't know how many people on this call will potentially be suppliers to the NHS, but my team holds a number of sessions throughout the year that are resources for suppliers. So we often get, I don't know where to start with baselining my emissions. I don't know what, I've heard of this thing called the Science-Based Targets Initiative, but I don't really know what it's all about. And we try to make that really simple and accessible for our supply chain. So there's a little QR code to the page. You can also just look up Sustainable Procurement NHS England, and you'll find all this stuff there too. And these are on-demand events, that you can watch on YouTube if you so wish. So thank you so much for your attention, and I will close there. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Alexandra. That's opened up a fair few questions. I'm sure there's some coming in the chat already. So thank you very much for that. Very interesting. So our second speaker today is Dr. Hammad Jeilani. He's qualified in medicine and is very passionate about tackling healthcare inequalities and improving sustainability through innovation. He has a Master of Science degree on Health and International Development from the London School of Economics. Hammad is the co-founder and medical director of Apian, a logistics startup company using drones and robotics to deliver faster, smarter and greener healthcare. Their mission is to build the NHS Autonomous Delivery Network to instantly deliver medical supplies to hospitals and home. Hammad, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stephen. All right, so I've got some slides. Let me know if you can see that. And I will. Yeah, brilliant. All right, okay, I'll crack on. So thank you all for joining. It's a real pleasure to be able to speak to all of you. I, as Stephen said, I'm a doctor by background, and one thing that you'll know about doctors, if anything, is that they're really good at medicine and what they do, and they tend to be good at a few other things as well, but they don't actually really appreciate what goes on in the background to make the hospital run. Now, obviously that's not fair. There'll be doctors who do. I'm trying my best to kind of get into that, to be as clued up as possible. It's kind of why Apian exists, is to make that more efficient. But the reason I point that out is because one of the first things that I did when I was in medical school and on my training was go behind the doors of the laboratory, and I was just completely amazed by what goes on in a lab, how complex it is, how busy it is, how stressful it is, how limited space there is, how much tech there is, how much automation there is in a laboratory already, and then on top of all of that, how complex the logistics can be. And all of that is very difficult to communicate to a consultant who's saying, go and find out where that why my blood results haven't come back yet. And it's like, it's a lot more complex than that. The sample has had to have gone off site, it's stuck in traffic, we don't know where it is. So just kind of give you a bit of background is that, the laboratory, the pharmacy environment, the soft services environment in the NHS is so crucial. It's the backbone of the NHS. But it's not always spoken about, and I think underappreciated. And so I think that experience, along with a couple of other bits and pieces in my history and and I can talk about that later, are why we got into Apian and why we set it up. So Apian is all about automation, as you heard Stephen say. It's about using, whether that be automated flying robots, drones, whether that be using automated ground robots, so quadruped robots, robot dogs, humanoid robots, but also things like AGVs. So you guys, I'm sure, have heard of companies like Waymo, the folks who use robo-taxis in LA. So if you arrive at LA airport and want to get to the Google's headquarters, you can just book a robo-taxi, it arrives, no driver, picks you up and drops you off, done. So that's also coming to the UK. Waymo announced earlier this year that they're coming to London, for example, so robo-taxis as well, ground robotics. And then also what I like to kind of call automated clicking robots, or robotic process automation, or agentic process automation. So it doesn't matter what kind of automative technology it is, we want to bring all of those together, create a system of systems and a platform that enables them to talk to each other, so that it doesn't matter what sample, what medicine, what medical device, what product needs to get from A to B within the healthcare ecosystem, but it does get there at the right time, at the right place, to the right person, and in the right state. Lots of cases of samples going in the bin because they've gone out of temperature bounds or been degraded, or etc. And I think the crucial element here is that it's about productivity. Automative technology has completely revolutionized the car manufacturing industry. It's revolutionized the grocery picking and packing industry. Look at Ocado and their fleet of robotics in their warehouses. So robotics often can work very well in sterile environments. You know, you don't exactly have members of the public walking around in BMW manufacturing plants, and you don't exactly have anyone but the robots moving around in Ocada's warehouses. So they work extremely well in sterile environments. So that's one extreme. On the other end of the extreme, there are a couple of organizations that are trying to deploy or have deployed robotics in completely like undifferentiated terrain with lots of variables. So people like Starship, who are using those little like cute robots that can deliver groceries to your door, and they just trundle along on the street. So that's like anything could happen. A car could smack into it. Someone on a bike could come and try and nick it. You know, a very, very unpredictable environment. The hospital environment is very different to both of those. It's kind of in the middle. It's both structured. You know, you've got corridors, you've got tunnels under the hospitals, you've got lifts, you've got service lifts. You know, you've got very structured environment that doesn't really change. But then you also have that mix of, staff and people in wheelchairs and elderly ladies with their like walking sticks. You know, how do you navigate those corridors when those sorts of things happen? So you have a bit of a variability there. And so robotics overall is extremely interesting, and drones in particular. It's a kind of the same. So where we are right now is that you can fly in these kind of segregated blocks of airspace that you get approved from the Civil Aviation Authority. So, you know, we apply, we say we want to fly in this kind of bubble of airspace from Guy's to St. Thomas's, blah, 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 gets approved, go through a load of paperwork, you know, takes up to 2 years as it did with the CAA in the first instance, going to get faster for subsequent requests. But that's kind of like what we're doing. That would be kind of almost the kind of example for, you know, BMW's manufacturing plant. It's sterile. No other drone operator should be flying in that location. No other airspace user should be, you know, the helicopter shouldn't be there. If the helicopters like HEMS or police or the security services want to fly in there, they have to kind of deconflict using the air traffic controllers at Heathrow Airport. So it's very controlled, very managed. The way that the drone kind of airspace model is moving towards is that it will eventually become undifferentiated and integrated. So what that means is that the idea is that there will be a system in place in the future. We're not working on that system, called UTM, Universal Traffic Management, that enables any drone, multiple drones of different operators for different reasons, whether it be, you know, film, cinematography, police, NHS drone delivery, and other airspace users like helicopters or whoever, to be able to use the same airspace and deconflict from each other using a automated form of air traffic control. The reason I just touch on that is because, again, that's all automation. It's all using systems and software to make things happen and make it happen safely to drive productivity. More specifically then, just on what drones are capable of, drones are really exciting because they are scalable. And while they scale, they can improve resilience. You know, it's one thing to be able to just put another 50 drivers on the road, but you can only do so much with more human bodies on the road doing more deliveries to more people. And as the NHS moves to moving care out into the community with its neighbourhood plan in its 10-year plan, then I think that NHS trusts are going to struggle to either find the human resource capacity to do all of those deliveries to everyone's homes, or it's going to become insanely expensive because you're just going to have to hire double, triple the amount of drivers. And driving in London is only getting more difficult. You know, you'll have heard that congestion charges now coming online for potentially for electric. It's been proposed for electric vehicles, which were previously exempt. Bond Street, I think it is, if I remember correctly, may become pedestrianised. So it's only going to become more congested, more difficult to flow through the system. One-way measures are being put in place and more expensive over time. And so drones are really the only form of transport that are projected to come down in cost. And the reason why they're projected to come down in cost is because at this moment in time, you have a situation where in order for one drone to fly in the sky, you basically need one drone operator overseeing that operation. But in due course, we'll have multiple drones being overseen by the same drone operator. It's called MSO. Multiple simultaneous operations. So similar to air traffic control, you have one air traffic controller managing the airspace for a bunch of different aircraft. And that's a model that we're heading towards. And that will massively reduce the labor cost, and that will bring down the cost of the drone operators to the point where it will become not just about, oh, the drones are amazing because they can be there quicker, they can be more reliable, they don't get stuck in traffic, but actually just screw it, we'll use the drones because they're cheaper, you know, than using just a van, and it will become a very competitive price point. But they also have the ability to fundamentally change the way in which we provide care. A few examples. Solent, we flew over to Solent. We flew medicines and did some work with boots. But the idea there was to be able to fly chemotherapy that's manufactured at Portsmouth manufacturing unit fly that over to the Isle of Wight. Currently, what happens is the chemotherapy is manufactured far in advance of that patient being authorized to receive that chemotherapy through a blood test. Sure, many of you will be familiar. Because of the amount of time it takes for that chemotherapy to get over, up to 4 hours. It goes in a taxi to the shoreline. It then gets picked up by a hovercraft or a ferry. And then once it reaches the Isle of Wight, it gets picked up by yet another taxi and driven over. And that whole process means that you have to make that chemotherapy before the patient has been kind of given the green light to receive it, which inevitably means that there are a cohort of patients that aren't able to receive it, but the chemo has already been manufactured and so it goes straight in the bin. And not only is that stupid from a waste perspective in terms of like costs, just directly, but it's also really bad for the environment because you've just gone and spent a whole bunch of effort from a hovercraft to 2 taxis to actually transport that chemotherapy that just went straight in the bin. But what about the sustainability cost of even creating the chemotherapy in the first place? What about the sustainability cost of having to move all of the products that go into creating that chemotherapy across potentially the world, different compounds, different liquids, different bits and pieces coming from different, that are then manufactured by batch and then driven over to the Portsmouth, the Isle of Wight, where they then inject yet more things to make it personalized. Like those all take carbon cost. And so a real big, and the same goes for blood products. Blood products are wasted all the time. Organs are moved from one place to another and then eventually discarded. Same goes for blood samples. The blood samples are delivered in blood tubes. Now, medicine is one of the most wasteful industries out there, and it's really shameful, and it's also one of the most polluting. It's shocking that we are happy to provide care to asthmatics and people with COPD, something that's close to my heart. My dad has both. But at the same time, the NHS is trundling around polluting the skies through nitrogen dioxide emissions, which are exceeding WHO limits across every single borough in London, for example. So it's like that kind of dichotomy of we are happy as a healthcare organisation to provide excellent gold standard care, but we don't really care if we trash the environment, and we don't really care if we trash your air. Now, obviously, I'm kind of making it a very redundant and simplistic argument there. It's obviously not that simple as described earlier. But when you think of it like that, in that very kind of naive way, it kind of creates a bit of annoyance inside of you that bubbles and festers. And that's kind of one of the reasons, again, why Apian was created, is because we fundamentally believe there's a better way to move things around and a way to make not just direct sustainable impacts because you're moving things in an electric drone, but also secondarily, you're reducing wastage. You're able to move medicines around that don't need to be then thrown in a bin, a medicine, shared library of medicines. It's all that sort of thing. Anyway, slight on a tangent. Drones are difficult specifically because, you're integrating into the healthcare stack. You're trying to work with healthcare systems, LIMS systems, porting management systems, order management systems. You're trying to work with 2 very highly regulated industries. The healthcare and the aviation regulations are some of the most bureaucratic. The aviation regulations are some of the most bureaucratic. And it can be quite hard to approve complex airspace routes. You have to do a lot of stakeholder engagement. So think, you have to go out to loads of stakeholders, say, are you happy for us to use this airspace? If some people say no, you then have to work things out with them. It's very long, drawn out. All of that is changing, and we're working quite closely with government on that. So what does Apian specifically do? We basically decomplexify that whole process. We focus on integration with software. So we're not a drone delivery company. We don't build or fly. We don't, in that sense, that we don't build or fly the drones. We are a logistics company that leverages drones. So we focus on the software, the order management system, which I'll talk about later, integration and automation, and we're drone agnostic. We'll work with all the different kinds of drone operators out there. We work with Zipline, Matinet, Wing, and a couple of others that were homegrown from the UK. And we're multimodal. Drones are not the be-all or end-all. They're not a silver bullet. They can't carry everything. So we do need to be able to work quite closely and in an integrated fashion with the ground logistics providers for failovers. So if the drones can't fly, they can quickly fail over to ground transport in the best and smoothest way. So as I said, we don't make or operate the drones. What we do is integrate drone services into the busy clinical environment and robotics. I'll come on to robotics later. I kind of have split the presentation, but it kind of covers both. We manage the airspace, we manage the operators on the drone and the ground if you wanted, and we own the relationship with the healthcare and the airspace regulators. And so in that way, and one of the reasons why Apian is called Apian is because we are an API. We are that application programming interface. We are that middleware that connects the very complex and fragmented and multi-system using NHS to the multiple complex, fragmented, highly regulated drone and aviation industry. So as I said, we did some good work in the Solon. We proved that it was absolutely fine to move monoclonal antibodies around in a drone by shaking it and vibrating it. That was the concern from the chief pharmacist. And we were able to demonstrate that we could move things quite quickly from Portsmouth to the Isle of Wight. As you can see, by the way, that dog-legged journey in red, it's a bit shocking. You're like, well, why can't you just fly in a straight line? Well, because airspace is obviously complex. And it's exactly to that point that to begin with, you might have to go around certain things, kind of go all the way around. But in the future, we will be able to move more directly from A to B. And it's a progress. It's a work in progress. So a similar point goes here. In Northumbria, we flew blood samples, medical devices. We flew a few other bits and pieces for the NHS Trust there. That was some work that was really well funded by SBRI. That Alexandra touched on, and there we flew from Wansbeck to Alnwick, between Wansbeck, Alnwick and Berwick on the northeast coast of England. Northumbria is actually the most disparate NHS trust in England, and so they cover a huge geography, and Berwick is quite isolated, and so patients who are receiving chemotherapy, you don't want them there just waiting for 1.5 hours to get their blood result to come back so that they can get the green light to receive chemotherapy. Why not just fly it down in about 20 minutes, and then you've saved that patient. So it's not just about patient outcomes, it's also patient experience. You know, just because someone lives in Berwick does not mean that they shouldn't get excellent care. And so that whole principle of connecting people and things that are remote is a really big part of this as well. But there again, you can see that we didn't actually fly directly across land. We flew over the waters, and that's again to reduce the complexities around having to deconflict from other airspace users. This is some videos that you'll be able to see on the slides, or in won't play now, but they go over the project in a bit more detail. This was some work that we did with NHS Blood and Transplant, proving that again we take verification and validation and the safety of what we do very seriously. Safety both in terms of obviously flying, but safety in terms of the actual product that we're delivering, you know, making sure that it's not being damaged. So we did a whole randomized controlled laboratory study, basically splitting identical blood packs into 2 groups, and flying 10, driving 10, and then proving that up until the end of the shelf life of those packs, there was no significant difference in a whole range of markers, from hemolysis to potassium to lactate dehydrogenase to whatever. And we published that in the British Journal of Haematology with NHSBT, kind of reassuring people that it's okay to fly things like red blood cells in drones and subject them to a bit of vibration. We flew for 3 months in Dublin last year with Medtronic, flying medical devices out of a centralized warehouse that we basically set up and ran for them to 2 hospitals in South Dublin, basically reducing the time taken from order to receiving that product down from 24 to 48 hours to 20 minutes or less. So again, the idea that you can reduce stock holding and therefore reduce wastage of medical devices in stock, which are very, you know, if you have a pacemaker or a ICD, an intracardiac defibrillator, that goes in the bin because it just stayed on the shelves for months on end and just wasn't used in the end, because, you know, you have to stock, hospitals have to stock their shelves with enough stock to make sure that they don't just run out every other day. So there's obviously often a buffer, and if inevitably some goes to waste, and often Medtronic representatives will go to hospitals and they'll do what's known as rotating the stock. So they'll put new stock in that you know, for the next 5-6 months or year, and they'll take away anything that's near to expiry, and often that goes in the bin. And again, you're thinking, okay, precious metals have gone into that. There's lithium in that. There's a battery in that. There's, you know, how much effort and like what's the sustainability impact of that potentially quite complex and expensive medical device going in the bin? So the idea of being able to centralize instead lots of different hospitals' stock into one location and move them quickly out by drone so that people can reduce the amount of stock they have on shelves, reducing expirations and wastage is also another part of this. For the last 9 months, we've been flying between Guy's and St. Thomas's. We've now delivered over 6,000 blood samples, a couple of examples of lab departments that we've flown for, and a couple more that are coming up. So the exciting ones coming up around transfusion, clinical transplantation, rapid pathogen metagenomics, and pharmacy as well. So that's been really exciting, moving samples from Guy's to St Thomas's in the heart of London, from the Shard to the London Eye. The drone takes 2 minutes or less, and the driver going by ground, if you just go from like door to door, it's 35 minutes, but it's not as simple as that, because obviously the drivers aren't just there waiting, ready to go at any moment. They are on a milk round, and so they often come and pick up every 2 hours. And if you did want an urgent ad hoc courier to come and pick up your sample, you obviously have to wait for them to come to you, and they often take up to half an hour to even arrive in the first place. And then they also have to go through traffic. So the nature of drones being on the roof of the cancer centre at Guy's means that it's truly on demand. The drone will take off, subject to weather and a few other things. It will take off when you need it. You don't have to wait for it to come to you in that sense. I won't play the whole video and I'll cut the sound, but this is just to show you the way that the drone flies. This is just one type of drone. This is Wing that we use. We're actually deploying Matanet instead now in the centre of London. We're moving Wing out to somewhere else. But there's the roof of the cancer centre. You can see the drone taking off. It hovers 7 meters above the landing spot. It drops a winch, that little yellow pill. The ground support operator loads the package onto the winch. The winch is retracted. It's locked into place. It rises to its cruising altitude, goes towards St Thomas's at 110 kilometers an hour, skipping all of that traffic in a straight line, and arrives there in 2 minutes. And then it does the reverse. It hovers 7 meters above where it wants to deliver. Winch comes down, package is delivered, it flies away. So you need no infrastructure at the delivery location. You just need some empty roof space or an empty space out in the car park or wherever it might be. So yeah, there you go. That's one of the most boring, ugly NHS roofs I've ever been on. Had the privilege of being on, and it can just deliver to that. The porter then picks it up and takes it away. So that's just show you an example of how some of these drones can operate in a really efficient manner. We have lots of regulatory support from the Regulatory Innovation Office, from the Department of Transport, from government, from the Civil Aviation Authority. So we work extremely closely with them. Obviously, no one in the world, no aviation authority in the world has approved such a drone delivery trial in the heart of a capital city of such urban and dense population, carrying things like medical samples. So kudos to the CA and the regulators for approving it, but they have much to work on, and we are lobbying them hard and working with them really closely with them to move things along. So what do we actually provide? We provide an order management system. So there you can see examples of a pathology canister of routine hemostasis or biochemistry flowing through the system, being booked by Alia, one of the medical laboratory assistants. You can see Epic in the background, where she's created her packing list, and then she's bunging the order in within a few clicks. She can request a drone delivery. Porter comes in, picks up the package, takes it to the roof. Drone does the delivery. Porter's waiting on the other roof, picks it up, takes it into the laboratory. And we've done some integration with the Epic Porter and Command system, so that actually there's no need to like call the porters, as it were. You just task the porters using the task management system they have on their mobile device, just like any other job that they'll get pinged on. And the idea is to turn logistics away from being an afterthought and a blocker for clinical care into an enabler for new models of care, and to really enhance operationally the lab environment, the pharmacy environment, being able to predict demand, forecast that, see where there's potentially going to be a breach of capacity, and maybe there's a dynamic rerouting of samples that can take place from one ESL to another, so that you can reduce the burden. All of these sorts of things to help drive efficiencies are coming into the future. And this is just an example of one of our orders. It was a priority delivery for 2 urgent troponin samples. The single biochemistry analyzer at Guy's was having some trouble with its QCs. So in that moment, the BMS decided that they would use the drones. And in less than 20 minutes, that sample went from Guy's to St Thomas's laboratory and was obviously processed there. Had it gone by ground, we tracked it, the ground courier, it would have taken over 2 hours, which is obviously clinically useless. You know, the doctors would have made a decision by then as to what to do with the patient who's suffering from a suspected myocardial infarction, cardiac arrest. So that's an example of resilience when things, you know, it's a laboratory environment. Every lab suffers from some form of problem every other day, you know, whether it be QCs or lab analyzers go down or routine maintenance. things go wrong all the time in the NHS, that's fine, but it's like, how do you then prevent that from negatively impacting clinical care? And again, having really good forms of logistics that are on demand, that can cut through traffic, provides that layer of resilience to the next level. You can track the drone, just like you can track your Uber driver. You know, drone is on its way, will arrive to the nearest minute at 10:39, whatever it might be. And we have that full integration. So you can see at every moment in time where that package is, which is really important, because actually a number of lab staff, for example, have told us, you know, it's not actually the speed that we care about. The speed is a bonus, don't get me wrong, it's great, but actually it's the visibility and the traceability that we really appreciate, because it means that we don't have to waste time waiting, wondering where is that sample. Do I go and do some work and get my hand stuck in and locked into that work for the next half an hour, or you know, or do I just wait here until I receive that sample? You know, so it's like little inefficiencies, and actually they're not little, because when you stack them up across the entire lab, across multiple different sites, across the entire trust, across the entire NHS, actually those inefficiencies are enormous. And this is just to show that we have a proof of delivery mechanism. So we have automated capture. So camera basically says, great, the porter picked up that package. Obviously, that's more important for things like very sensitive or highly precious samples, or things like controlled drugs. And there's the roof of Lambeth Wing at St Thomas's with the drone about to deliver, and the porter showing his portering app with the task to collect the package. And this is to show very briefly that we are running agentic process automation. So what you're seeing right now on your screen is a bot, to put it mildly, to put it in layman's terms, a bot logging into Epic Portering Command, creating two portering tasks, submitting it all within a few milliseconds, essentially. A few seconds, and all in an automated fashion, so that there's no need for the human to actually even book the porter to come and pick up the package. But even that we're trying to automate using robotics. So we work with, again, just like with the drones, we use multiple different types of drones, we use multiple different types of robotics. We're working with all the different kinds of robotics manufacturers you can think of. Ones in China that are really amazing. We're speaking to Boston Dynamics from America. You know, they're all slightly different capabilities, different kind of modifications, different price points. But what's amazing about robotics is over the last couple of years, through all the work on chips, through all the work on hardware, is that they've finally come down to a price point that is really attractive, and they are very capable. You know, these robots can do backflips, they can go on all terrains, they can climb upstairs like a knife through butter, they can skim along the corridor quicker than you can jog. They're being used now in off-road conditions, in nuclear power plants. So these things are now very highly capable, in fact more capable than what we really need in the NHS, which is just communicate with the lift, go in the lift, go up some stairs, and maybe up a 4-degree incline. You know, we don't need it doing backflips, but it's just to demonstrate that these things are highly capable, and they've finally come down to a really amazing price point that means that we can start looking at deploying them at scale. And the really beautiful thing about using these robotics is that, you know, we're talking to porters, and they're like, well, the porters are like stretched thin, and they need to be focusing on moving patients into x-rays, moving beds, moving patients to, you know, between different wards or off to the patient transport. You know, often lots of very patient focusing tasks. They don't need to be moving samples from A to B. Really, they don't need to be. They could be doing much, or, you know, tasks of much higher order of importance. And this is not about replacing porters. This is about supporting porters, reducing the need for them to do basically completely, you know, non-human required tasks, so they can focus on those human required tasks that are often more patient-facing or complex. So in summary, Apian uses APIs with our platform. We integrate into different forms of hardware. We use agents, we use software like APA, and we're also now using these robots. We're hoping to deploy them at GOSH by the end of the year, and moving things like samples, medicines, and other bits and bobs. We also just recently had a really good conversation with the team at Essentia at Guy's and St Thomas's for soft services. So moving things like, you know, these are one kind of robot with wheels, but there are other robots that can move pallets. So, you know, moving things like trolleys of food, linen, waste bins, cleaning robots, all things that again can reduce the need for humans to have to go up and down, up and down, up and down 50 times to get like lunch to patients in 10 different wards in the Tower of Guy's. And if you've ever been in these, you know, big tall tower buildings of the NHS, the lifts are incredibly annoying. You have to wait often 5-10 minutes for the lift to even come down. And when it finally picks you up, it then calls at every floor. And it's like the most annoying thing. And so there's so much time that gets wasted with all of these sorts of things. So there's lots of inefficiencies that we can remove through using robotics, again, not just kind of like clinical, but also non-clinical or soft services. And so the idea is that in the future, just to give you an example on that, on the blood sample side, is that right now we kind of have automated this middle bit with the drone instead of using a driver in a van. But in the future, what we want is an entirely automated process from the moment that blood test is taken. And in the future, that actually it's already being generated, it's already being used in China, for example. You've got robots that take blood from you automatically. You put your arm down, it scans you, it takes the blood from your veins, and off you plop. So even that's now being automated. But the idea is that the moment that blood sample is taken, the agentic process automation books the transport, the robot takes that sample to the drone flies, or the automated ground vehicle in the future will drive along the ground, the robot picks it up on the other side and takes it into the analyzer, which is a robot. And like the idea, like to give you another kind of example to really hammer home the kind of grand vision that we have, is that you want the ability for a nurse to be able to just press a button on their like lapel clock, the thing that they attach to their like shirt that tells for the little watch. If they were to press a button and say, get me Clive, get me Rosita, I've got a sample. Boom. 2 minutes later, this little Rosita wheels over and says, I'm over here, pop the sample in my back. The nurse goes, take the sample down to the lab. The dog goes, which lab is that? Is that the 3rd floor lab in Tower Wing, or is that the 4th floor lab in Southwark Wing? 4th floor lab in Southwark Wing. Great, on my way. It then trundles over to the lab. Like that's the idea, and and then it will be driven over or through the automated vehicle or flown over, and then again on the other side, another robot at the central laboratory is waiting to receive that package, and we're working on that already. How to receive things automatically straight into the fabric of the building. So it's like that idea of like not even requiring any touching of even software systems or IT. Just say, get the sample from here to here, done, at your service. Because these systems are capable of doing that. Finally, in the last minute, and it's not to be the last kind of, because it's not the most important, but I wanted to round it off on the most important topic, sustainability. Electric drones are phenomenal. People often don't realize that while they can be 98.4% more carbon efficient or fewer emissions than urgent ad hoc couriers, it's like a petrol-powered motorbike, obviously you think that makes sense, much fewer emissions. But actually, drones are also 22 times more carbon efficient than even electric vans. And that surprises people. And when you convert that, if you were to do a like-for-like comparison, that's 95% more energy efficient. And so you think to yourself, yes, we're using electric vehicles, but even they aren't good enough. They're still drawing electricity, and that electricity has to come from somewhere. And often that comes from non-renewable sources. And so if we're really serious about cutting out as much reliance on carbon, then you want to use the most efficient forms of transport, and some of those and drones are in that category. And so there you go, for every kilometer traveled, drones produce 194 grams less carbon than traditional delivery vans, but 51 grams less carbon than even electric delivery vans. And that kind of, when you really think about it, kind of makes sense. These electric vans are 2 tons, they have a massive 1/2 ton, 1 ton lithium battery. They get stuck in traffic. They're constantly stopping and starting. They're going on windy roads. So it's no surprise that drones are so much more efficient from a carbon perspective than even electric vehicles. And then, as I said, there's a whole host of second order benefits as a result of using such automated forms of technology. And that's a wrap. Thank you very much. Back to you, Stephen.
Thank you so much, Hammad. That was a fascinating talk. So we've got some questions in the chat. The first question is from Michael Dolan. So it'll take a moment for William to find Michael and unlock his video and audio.
Hi there.
Hi, far away, Michael.
No, it's just a question about whether MHRA have been involved in discussions, because with the new medical device regulations, they're more advising on the use of products beyond the lifetime in terms of medical equipment, rehabilitation aids, that they shouldn't be used beyond the manufacturer's recommended lifespan. Though naturally with NHS, we've always been using these products way longer than they've been recommended by the manufacturers. And that probably needs to be addressed, otherwise we will be spending more money on more products and throwing away products which are perfectly good and usable and safe.
Probably Alexandra, please.
Yeah, definitely. And well said, well pointed out. I think that's really critical. One of the really challenging things about the kind of key areas that we've chosen to focus on, where we have the most impact, is that two of them, medtech and medicines, are highly regulated. MHRA is absolutely involved in the work that we're doing. And I should point to really the Design for Life roadmap that was published in October of last year sets out how we want to begin to move more to circular economy. But as part of that, it addresses a lot of the things around plastics and durability of products, et cetera. I think really importantly as well, there's actually was just launched last week, the work around value-based procurement. So I know that's a bit of a, for anyone in procurement, that's a bit of a kind of a word they've heard before, a term they've heard before, but essentially the idea is that it's looking at, particularly in the medtech space, a wider version, a wider understanding and vision of what value is. So not just the product cost, but also its durability, its the patient outcomes that come from it, the materials that go into it, the sustainability of it, et cetera. And I think what's been really good about that work, particularly on value-based procurement and on Design for Life, is MHRA's interest in understanding how the regulation environment can support this. Class 1 devices are a good example. We cannot remanufacture Class 1 devices under MHRA guidance at the moment. Things like pulse oximeters you have on your finger when you go to the hospital, that kind of thing. But that happens across the world regularly. It's standard practice in, say, the United States. So there's a lot of work to say, okay, what are the things we can start with that are sort of maybe the more straightforward things, but MHRA is absolutely signed on to this, and NICE as well, I think, is important as well. I think some of the work that we want to be done around understanding how medicines are manufactured and produced, there's a real role for the regulator to play in that, rather than us sort of at the back end when we're doing the buying, saying we want this to be done. We want it to be part of just general regulations. So yes, sorry, long answer, but thank you, Michael. Yes, MHRA is involved, and I think, but there's still more to do, I think, in terms of making it integral into their approach.
Thanks, that's reassuring to know they're involved. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alexandra, and thanks for the question, Michael. We'll go to Jeff Lester, please, followed by Gillian Manning.
Hello, I don't know that my camera's working, but can you hear me?
We can hear you clearly, thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexandra and Hammad, for inspiring pair of talks. They were really marvellous. You've both touched quite a lot on waste. I was in pathology for 40 odd years, and the waste of things like blood products is always tragic. Because of they're really valuable, and the patient samples are really valuable. It's great to see the initiatives that you're taking. But my question was really to Alexandra about, we saw during the COVID pandemic the amount of really quite tragic waste across the NHS, which came from products being produced that simply weren't fit for purpose. How can the supply chain, or what can be done in procurement to ensure that we don't have that situation again?
Thank you so much, Jeff. I think I share your horror. We all, I think, shared your horror during COVID when we saw how, in our rush to get, the right products to the right places at the right time, we really struggled with waste. And I think a lot of lessons have been learned from that. Oh, there you are, Jeff. I can see your face now. And a lot of lessons have been learned from that. I would say one of the really critical things, I would point to my colleagues and friends in NHS supply chain. So the way that we buy most of our products in the NHS is through a framework host called NHS Supply Chain. They're owned by NHS England. They're single shareholders in NHS England, but they operate independently. And they have really focused on that principle of getting the right product to the right place at the right time. And I think that's to do with logistics. It's to do with buying. It's a complex problem to solve because there's so many people that feed into it. Value-based procurement that I mentioned before, I think, is a really critical one. So understanding having a broader understanding of the value of the product when you're buying it, so we don't buy those wasteful, throwaway, not fit for purpose products in the first place. It's going to take some time. I think it'll take a long. Perfection is well. Yeah, if we waited for perfection, we never get anywhere. So we'll work on it and continue to improve it. But there's a huge push towards making sure that is a critical principle and in the way that we buy of trying to design out that waste.
Thanks very much, Alexandra. Thanks for the question, Jeff. Could we move on to Gillian Manning, please, followed by Catherine Morehouse.
Hello. It's been a really interesting session from both of you, and with an education perspective, I wasn't sure how this all the work going on really around ensuring education providers and their sustainability, but also around work to embed sustainability, all of this technology within curricula across from management, all the way across the health service.
Such an important point, Gillian. And I would say this is probably an area where we have a fantastic clinical transformation team and also a sort of training, learning, and development team within the Greener NHS family, I would call us. And there's a lot of there's free and easily accessible training available to anyone in the NHS on carbon literacy. But I see what you're saying, Gillian, particularly around where there are opportunities for greening, say, a clinical area or a pathway. One thing that I think we've worked on recently, I can take no personal credit for, but I think it's fantastic work, is linking up the greener pathway sort of agenda with the Getting It Right First Time work, so the GIRFT program that's run out of NHS England. And so looking at how we can make sure clinical pathways are as efficient as possible, but thinking about the sustainability side of that as well as part of that. I think there's probably more we could do around bringing this into core curriculum for our clinicians and for just generally for people coming through the education system. But there's definitely huge efforts to make that happen, particularly in clinical areas.
Thank you. Hammad, do you have anything to add on that?
No, except for it's not just you folk, it's also the doctors that need to better understand the impact of what they're doing on sustainability, because they're often the end users, they're the biggest users of some of these products. And we need to educate our doctors just as much as everyone else. So couldn't agree more.
Lovely, thank you so much. So Catherine Morehouse next, please, followed by Catherine Manley. Thank you. Is this difficult to find, William?
Hi, Stephen. No, I have unmuted, but they may not be there.
Okay, fine. If you go on to Catherine Manley, then please, followed by Estin James.
Hi there.
Hi.
Thank you so much. Hiya. Thank you so much for the talk. It was really informative. Yeah, I just wanted to ask because I work a lot in theatres and we throw away every day so much plastic and waste, and I just think it's so unsustainable right now. Especially just, using all of the fossil fuels to make the plastic as well as being a problem for the environment. How do you see that being more sustainable in the future?
I'll pick that up quickly. It's really a problem. I know, and it's something that I think many people see and feel every day, and have been frustrated by it for a long time. There's a really brilliant resource called the Green Theatre Checklist. It may be something you're already aware of, but it's a really useful set of actions, key principles to take in the theater environment to make it a more sustainable environment and reduce waste. Obviously, we need to think about the inputs, the products that are coming in the first place, et cetera, but there's a lot that can be done around theaters, not least just turning off equipment at the end of the day. There's actually one of the biggest savings that can happen is just turning things off, and then and they turn back on in the morning, lo and behold. So yeah, some key principles like that. I will put that in the chat, but I'll also just say, if you just Google NHS Green Theatre Checklist, it's a brilliant resource and it's free for anyone to use.
Thank you. It's not just plastics, though, is it? We're also throwing away scissors after they've been used to cut 3 sutures on a wound. There are larger instruments that are used and abused, I would say. Ultrasonic shears for cutting and coagulating in minimally invasive surgery, in excess of £500 per piece of kit, and they're disposed of. Number one, a design change would prevent that. Number two, these devices can and have been shown to be they can be remanufactured. But then medical ethics kicks in here, because the company had a deal to lease the console which this device worked, and when they were taking remanufactured kit, they said, well, you're not meeting your contract price, a contract of a certain number per month. So we will, if you don't go back to your contract, we will take away the console. So medical ethics has a large piece to play here. Alexandra, any comment on that?
I think it's also just about what you set up in your contract in the procurement process. It's being clever, thinking ahead about what building flexibility into a contract to say, well, actually, we're going to work with, we want to enable our suppliers to tap into innovative ideas and opportunities. And so I think it's also about how we, I think from a procurement point of view, which is my area of expertise, I would say that there's a really important thing to build in that thought process, and also just be curious about what can happen. Be curious about what can be improved over the life of a contract, because they can be quite a long time, these contracts.
Thank you. Hammad, any comment?
No, that's fine.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, if we could go on to Estin James, please, from Velindre Hospital in South Wales.
Hello. Thank you for the talk. That was really interesting. Yeah, my question really was around the drone technology. Curious how we might measure or mitigate the impact of weather conditions and the risk of supply chain around that, potentially long storms, delaying deliveries for long times.
Yeah, very valid question, one that we are asked all the time. Long story short, drones, like any other aircraft, have weather limitations, predominantly around wind and stormy weather. Rain is not really an issue whatsoever. And therefore, when they cannot fly, we either default to the existing ground transport mechanism that's already in place, and so the drones are superlative, so we don't actually touch the existing milk ground, and so it's just an opportunity for the drone to get there quicker, the sample to get there quicker than it otherwise would have. Or what we do is we work in partnership with the trust to say, okay, this is your service level agreement. If it cannot go by drone, we will automatically fail over to one of these following ground delivery options, whether they be third-party logistics or like local taxis. So it will entirely depend on the use case, the distances involved, and the preference of the procurement team at the trust that we're speaking to, and they will have slightly different preferences, but we do all. We're happy to work with ground operators. It's not a competitive, it's a very much how do we work together to make this more efficient for the trust. Lovely, thank you. Next question is from SNM. I don't know the name. This relates to, it's not about sustainability, so we'll allow this question, but anything else that's not sustainability related, I'll skip on past. Do we have SNM online now, William?
Hi again. I've unmuted them, but again, they may not be here.
Okay, Andrea Clough, then, please. I can see her question. If she's not there, I can just go straight in and answer it. Okay, far away. So she's asked, drones can be intercepted and the package received by those it wasn't intended for, much easier than road transportation. How is this potentially mitigated for? I challenge that. No, it's actually a lot harder to shoot down a drone that's going at 110 kilometers an hour and blends in with the grey skies of London, and going at and is above 400 feet, at 400 feet. So, but to be less flippant, the ways in which we mitigate are that we don't broadcast where these drones are. We don't kind of just give that information out to people. The drones aren't like traceable unless you have access to the platform, and we don't say what's being carried inside it. So in the same way, but there's a risk of everything. I'd be lying to say if there was no risk. In the same way that people break into the back of medicines vans, they try and break into pharmacy manufacturing units to try and steal drugs. There's a risk of all of that in every situation, but actually in some ways the drones are more secure because they're fully traceable. You know exactly where the product is at all times, you know who handed it over last, and they actually go straight from roof to roof. So in that sense, there is no way to physically intercept it unless you were to try and shoot it down, which is unlikely. In terms of the robotic side, your question around, you said it's easy to use in buildings where there are just staff present. Hospitals, clinics, ETH, several types of non-staff groups on site. Do they shut down and lock if touched to lifted? So this is work that we're currently doing. It's called Human Robotics Interaction, HRI, and it's a very, very interesting and new field, and it is what we are pioneering in that kind of, as I said, that middle ground environment where it's structured, but there are people still around. We absolutely intend to deploy in the corridors of GOSH, so we will be coming up against patients, public, drivers who are coming in to do a delivery and see how they interact. Broadly speaking, we don't expect there to be any major concerns. We will be doing a decent amount of engagement, community engagement, staff and patient and public engagement, PPIE. So we would expect people to be very, very aware, but the robot will be designed to be intuitive. So if you were to try and pick it up, then yes, it would potentially sound an alarm. It might even speak. It might say, put me down. It might flash some lights. And we would obviously be immediately notified, and we could obviously then see where exactly it's been picked up. It has sensors, so it knows. So there are ways around those sorts of kind of what we like to call workable problems of what happens if someone kicks it over. The robot can write itself. It can send an alert. We could send a member of the security team to go and have a look, that sort of thing. But we don't really expect. We think it's highly unlikely that you'll have a situation where members of the public are coming in and nicking the robot. If that's what you're doing. That answers a question from Andrea Clough, who said that she hadn't been unlocked for video or audio. There's obviously a technical problem there, but that answers her previous question.
So we've really come to the end of the questions. So I would very much like to thank our speakers, Alexandra and Hammad. It's been a very, very interesting and thought-provoking webinar. And I'd also like to thank William Smith in the background, who's organised the webinar and been making sure that people are linked up and videos and audios are on and off. I'd also like to thank everybody who's attended, and for you to have a good day and carry on improving patient outcomes. Upcoming events, there will be a webinar probably late November, early December on patient group directives run by the Academy of Healthcare Science. There will be a webinar on sustainability probably in February and March of next year. And I'm hoping to have a webinar entitled Demystifying Medical Robots at some point in the first 3 months of next year. That's going to take a little bit of organising because it's with an American corporate who I've got some links with. So thank you everybody for turning up, and I hope to see you at future events. Thank you and goodbye.